take this camera, rotate it this way.
Ooh, great.
So that, and then diminish this tilt to a third, to right here.
Yeah.
So that I can go from this to a close-up and then come to this, and we'll already be in a tilt. Otherwise, this looks like he's just moving shit. Newton Thomas Sigel pretty much shoots every movie I make, and we always try different things. We keep some sense of similarity because we're trying to emulate X-Men films of the past, but at the same time, we always want to try things that are different, with color, with clarity, with different cameras.
I like to explore new things, both thematically and aesthetically. And this movie actually is very smart.
It's some food.
Follow to the elevator.
And we go up and we see it go into a guy's hand, and we bring it into the elevator, and we do the whole damn thing on a Steadicam in one shot. This was my first time using the Alexa cameras. We still use the 3-reality rigs we had used on our last native stereo film.
3D presents a huge, huge dilemma for filmmakers from here on. There's an aesthetic challenge. Your lens choices are different. The way you move the camera is different. The way you compose is different. Your editorial rhythm is different. So everything about it is different.
I find that you can do a lot of things in 3D that you don't have the opportunity to do in 2D, and a lot of the things that we used to kind of cheat in 2D, you're not allowed to cheat anymore. If the debris is supposed to blow towards somebody, and you just blow it straight out behind them or away from them, it doesn't look any different in 2D. Everyone thinks it came towards them. In 3D, everybody can tell.
I'll count it out. 3, 2, 1, action.
Yeah, that does look weird.
In X-Men Days of Future Past, I wanted really two very distinct looks. I've really tried in the 70s to create a look that has the real feel of that period, because yeah, there's a design element where, you know, a 1973 shirt or a hat that would have been made to certain colors, certain materials, certain designs. And so in that sense, I've had a ton of fun with the use of certain colors, of pastels, of grain, a kind of real homage to our visual memory.
Certainly the scenes that were set in the future were much darker. The 70s had much more pop to it, much more variety.
The 70s is much more saturated, much more colorful, textural, with mud and grain and dirt. And the future is cold. It's kind of clean look. It's dark. It's not a real happy place to go.
The most magical day on set for me was the first day with the new cast, which is the scene between James McAvoy and Patrick Stewart, where old and young Charles look each other in the eyes and have that dialogue. But that was the first day that essentially the original cast passed the baton to the new cast.
Charles. Charles. So this is what becomes of us. Eric was right.
The scene where the young Charles meets the older Charles was so beautiful. First of all, the way they acted it, but Tom Sigel with John Meyer created what was a set we'd been in for 12 days like it was another worldly experience. They completely relit it, they completely changed it.
I had laid 2 giant mirrors behind the actors, so there would be this ethereal version of themselves sort of out of focus behind themselves. So I was able to shoot the actors sometimes with the version of themselves in the mirror behind them facing the other way, and sometimes I would shoot into the mirror, and in the mirror, it wasn't a straight mirror, it was more mylar, so it was bendy, and so as a result of that, the heads would twist and move, and then that sort of informed this idea for an effect I would lay over the whole scene.
We laid epoxy down on the floor so that the floor became a mirror as well, so that wherever you pointed the camera, you saw reflections of other people and lights, and it became a real fun, exciting set to be in.
John Ottman is our composer and editor. He's, I think, the only one of his kind, actually, which is a real bonus because when he's cutting the movie, he's hearing the music, he knows a certain pace.
He's the only person I've ever worked with on a film that fulfills 2 heads of department roles.
Let's lower the dynamic a little less than they're doing now, but a little more than they did originally.
Where should we come out?
Even though I was only involved in X-Men 2, you feel some ownership over something you've helped create. And I was always bummed that we didn't continue because as a composer, I had written all of these little themes that I was going to expand upon on the next film, and then we just left it.
Did you put in the kick?
The kick?
Kick, Mystique's kick.
Yes.
I always love working with John. I think the dual role of editor and composer helps to inform the other. They both deal with rhythm. They both deal with pace, they both deal with pauses and drama, pathos, things like that. The editor's a storyteller.
I always say the best editors are closet composers without knowing it, because both jobs, if you're doing them well, are telling a story. And your best film scores are those where you could remove them from the movie and hear a story being told. And I think editors who have that sensibility, they're the best storytellers.
You said you want to interrupt all the mansion stuff.
No, I don't want to interrupt necessarily all the mansion stuff.
That's fine.
Well,
yeah.
I'd probably do at some point, or at least shorten it.
It's hard to think of Bryan and John not being locked at the hip. They're so kind of innately in sync together. They work really well together. At times they fight like cats and dogs, but that's part of a good, healthy relationship.
I'm my own worst enemy because as the editor, it's my job to make the best film I can before I start scoring. And to do that, I got to present a movie that emotionally and pacing-wise works for the studio. And so I've got to create a really good temp score to sell it. The problem is, then I have to go live up to the temp score I've created, and I get very intimidated by what I've done.
So coming in around here, we'll probably start going back to what they just did.
Then why don't we just pick up from 10 to 22?
Okay.
With the score of this movie, I just want it to be appropriate. You want it to drive the story forward, have the emotion, have some themes that are memorable. So when you reprise a theme at a certain moment, it delivers a subconscious emotion about a character's decision or action.
From the onset, we knew this would be a darker film and a darker score. And as traditional as I like to be with these characters and create the soul of the movie musically, at the same time, we wanted this to be more modern, so it's sort of an amalgam of traditional and modern scoring techniques put together.
I think with this one, he wanted to use more electronics than he'd used before. That was a touch of the influence of the 70s. The 70s was when electronic music started to really find its legs.
Let's go ahead and just anticipate this one being more straight. Okay. Charles Xavier never had a theme in any of the movies. The story was never really about him per se. The film is about a guy who's lost all the hope that he's known for. To me, the cornerstone of this movie, emotionally, is less about the Sentinels, and it's about Charles Xavier. And so I did a theme for him, which is really the main thread through the movie.
Time's up!
Sentinels!
The opening was a really difficult scene, so I thought about putting in some classical piece of music, but that just didn't work, because it's a very dark, brutal scene.
To his credit, he's ambitious in the best way, and he just wanted to try a different piece there, and he tried, and it just didn't work.
We were down to the wire. I mean, the movie had to be delivered. The soundtrack, everything had to be delivered because it was going to all the foreign territories, tens of thousands of theaters, and it wasn't working. So he did some tweaks on it, and I brought in the bosses in the studio brass, and I just said, here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna hear 2 cues. We're gonna scrap the one that's original. John's gonna have to write a new cue, orchestrate it, and mix it in the next 72 hours. And it's a 4-minute cue with a 100-piece orchestra. And this has to happen.
It was like 11th hour idea. I think in 2 nights I wrote that.
John is great at dealing with the curves, but he doesn't always like them. So it was a little bit of a challenging moment, but he's incredibly gifted at then going and doing the work and coming back with something you go, exactly. And that was kind of the case.
It works beautifully. You know, you would never know how much we struggled and how little he slept to deliver that cue.
It is a mission. It really is. You're going to put your heart and soul and life into something, and if you're going to do that, you might as well make it the best thing you possibly can. And then the other very complicated process is basically marrying all the sound together, the score and the sound effects, and getting that perfect balance. To me, it's a complete intertwining, interplay of the two.
John Ottman is an amazingly talented guy. As an editor and composer, I would say that we spent the most time dealing with John.
There's very few picture editors that are also the music composers. It's great for us because we can get feedback from him pretty quick, because while he's cutting his movie, he basically is sort of structuring his music, and he's cutting with a rhythm in his head and a frequency in his head that he's planning on using in those scenes.
As much back and forth you can get with the director and a guy like John to get them involved as much as possible all the time. You want it because they're talented, they know what they want, they know the history, they know what scenes should sound like before you even see them. So having their input is one of the most important things.
John did a beautiful score, and there were sections where you have to decide as a mixer, what do we need to be listening to here? And there were times when in films, people will try to hear everything at once. Well, an audience doesn't want to hear everything at once. They want you to decide as the group of filmmakers what they should be paying attention to.
You can create a reality in sound that you can't do with picture. Sound is real as we experience it. And so to me, making that life really alive and fooling you for the 90 minutes or 2 hours that you're in the theater, sound, I think, brings that to the table.
Too late, assholes.